Okay, we are live now. Hello, today we are talking to Nicolas Volpicelli. He is a candidate for the Township Committee at Millburn for the election, which is going to be held on November 3rd. Um, Nick is very much a person who has deep roots in the area. He was born in the Overlook Hospital, raised in Chatham, um, son of an Italian American from Brooklyn and an immigrant from France. He's an Eagle Scout. He was educated at UMich, where he studied aerospace engineering, and then spent 5 years in the United States Navy as a nuclear engineer. So he's both a rocket scientist and a nuclear engineer. Then he did his MBA from UMich, did consulting at McKinsey and Booz Allen, where he became a partner. He's done several different community programs like Lead New Jersey program. He's a coach for the soccer team, Club Scout Pack 17, involved with Guy Bosworth, American Legion, president of the Rackets Club of Short Hills, and the list goes on. His wife, who's also a leader of Girl Scout Troop and has led the Odyssey of Mind 2 times, otherwise works as an MD at an investment bank. Nick, his wife, and his 3 children have lived in our town for 13 years. Welcome to this conversation, Nick, and thank you for making the time.
Thank you. Thank you for the introduction and for the opportunity and sharing your platform with me. It's very generous of you.
Nick, so as you know, this is a nonpartisan conversation. We want to get to know you, your background, your thoughts, motivations, and a little bit about your position on the issues of importance to the township. So let's get started. First off, my question is a bit on your personal background. Between you and your wife, you represent maybe the two most common professions in this town, which is consulting and finance. But you also spent 5 years in the US Navy. Tell us more. How did you decide to go to the Navy and why?
Yeah, my father paid for his own college coming out of Brooklyn, right? Very much the story of salt of the earth people who were working their way up the American ladder. And so he managed to pay for his own school by doing ROTC. And so when it came my time, I didn't want to just default automatically to asking my parents to pay for my schooling. And so I looked around at opportunities to do that myself, and Navy ROTC was an avenue that would give me that opportunity, and frankly would be kind of an adventure, right? In your early 20s, finding something of consequence to do. And so I thought I'd give it a shot. And so it was a great adventure in my life. 5 years was enough. And so then I went off back to get more schooling and into a professional career. But I certainly don't regret the Navy. I had a chance to fly an airplane, to drive a submarine, to navigate ships, to ride in tanks. It was really an interesting experience.
So it was a combination of seeking adventure, doing something outside of your local comfort zone, and getting some financial support to go to college and advance.
That's right.
Um, okay. Now, in terms of your activities, as I mentioned earlier, the list is long, from soccer coaching all the way to being president of the local rackets club. How do you pick these things? What drives you to participate in so many of them, and what motivates you?
Yeah. Listen, it's a little bit like Forrest Gump, where you do a few at a time, and then you look back and you say, wow, you ended up doing quite a few interesting things. It's not like I look to overload myself. And in fact, if I win this election, I'll resign from the board of Rackets before coming on the township committee. There's a great set of folks ready and able to take over Rackets. I've complete confidence in the next generation. Um, and I only look for organizations that I, one, care about, and two, that I think need some help. So when I lived in Hoboken, our condo building had 22 units and the condo association was going bankrupt. And they basically wanted a whole new board. Well, somebody had to be the president. No one wanted to do it. Shucks. Okay, I'll do it. So then I applied my business skills, right? Did a Pareto of all the costs, looked at the big ones, insurance, management fees, heating expense. I taught myself how to use the boiler system, this antiquated, massive boiler system to lower the excess heat. So I chopped all the costs I could. And then I looked at our fees and they were well below the town average. So I got unanimous support from the 22 other, the 21 others, and we raised our fees still below the average, but a significant hike. And we balanced our budget. And then we created a plan of what we were going to improve: the hallways, the roof that was leaking, other things. So that was the first one where I kind of stepped in. Then we moved to Short Hills. Obviously, as an Eagle Scout, I wanted to help with the scouting organization, having two boys. So I've gotten involved with Cub Scout Pack 17. And then with Rackets Club, nobody really wanted to be the next treasurer. And so, shucks, okay, I'll do it. And I did the same thing. Look at the costs, look at revenues, and I'm very proud of how much stronger we are now than when I first started. And it's a great little organization. It's small, but it's a fun little organization, and I've enjoyed being on the board.
So the pattern is you see something needs to be done and you jump in and take responsibility. Well, that's great. I must thank you. I think, of course, there will be opponents and there will be supporters, but more people participate in the civic life, the better off all of us are. So from that perspective, I must thank you, whether people support or not. I'm sure we all thank people for participating in the civic life.
Thank
But
you.
there does seem to be some thinking towards civic leadership. You did the Lead New Jersey Fellowship Program. Tell us more about it. And is there a broader plan? Do you wish to build more and more in this direction of civic leadership and potentially politics?
Yeah, so in 2010, my firm was looking for people who wanted to participate in Lead New Jersey. I raised my hand, being a native New Jerseyan and someone who always has a curiosity. And so they select 60 people a year from all walks of life, all backgrounds, and all across the state. And then we spend a weekend a month looking at the issues facing New Jersey. So we spent a day in the Big House Penitentiary at Trenton State, in with the inmates, very educational. We spent a day feeding the poor in Patterson. We spent a day looking at education in Camden, the environment down in the wetlands. And it was a fascinating group of people: Democrats, Republicans, independents, all different races, backgrounds, for-profit, nonprofit, government, clergy, a really interesting dynamic mix. And I said in my video, the conversations certainly are dynamic and not always easy, but we tried to be respectful and we tried to be constructive, looking for ideas that could work amongst the most of us. And that's a little
Sounds
bit
like a fascinating program.
It's fantastic. I recommend anybody who's got an interest in New Jersey, look at this thing. It's really neat.
Is
It's
there a
led.
broader plan towards taking this to something different, something potentially at a different scale, maybe a state level office or a county level office or a national office?
I don't know. I think this one's bad, enough. Um, I'm perfectly happy with my career and with the direction I'm in. So I'm not really looking to build off of this, but I started becoming more aware of town politics in the last year and a half. And looking at some of these township committee meetings, I didn't like the tone, the tenor, or the constructiveness. And so I said, maybe do I need to get involved? And I would have been perfectly happy if anybody else wanted to run. But the fact is, nobody really wanted to run on the Republican side. And I felt strongly somebody had to run. Somebody had to represent a second point of view to at least have a conversation so that the town at least had options. And then I met Dr. Menon, And he really seemed like the kind of cerebral, calm person that I could work with. And so I said, if you're in, I'm in. Let's do this. Let's give the town some options. And that's what's drawn me into the race.
Okay. So for now, this is the step, and certainly there are 22 people somewhere in Hoboken who can vouch for your skills in building a community together. We'll get to some of the issues on how the township is working, but just a couple more quick questions. On your personal side, tell us something where you learned something new that helped change your mind. An example of where you grew when you got some new information.
Yeah, I mean, it happens all the time in consulting, right? You have a hypothesis you're chasing down, and then you start asking questions, doing research, or running the numbers, and it turns out to not be right. And then you better reflect the reality that you're coming into. If you have an agenda, you're not going to serve your clients well. You need to take them where the numbers, where the analysis leads you.
So, is
So,
there an example that you could share with us where that happened in a way that maybe even surprised yourself? That something
well,
that was well held, as deeply held in your thinking, got changed when you were shared with some evidence or data?
Well, I'll give kind of a big example. When the Fukushima nuclear crisis happened, I was one of the more nuclear savvy people in my firm. So the board of directors called me up and said, Nick, do we need to evacuate the Tokyo office? And I said, wow, you know, the quick answer would be yes, let's get everybody out of there. But I realized there would be disruption to people's lives, to business, it would cause chaos, maybe panic. And so instead, I said, let me call some of my clients that I really respect in the nuclear industry, compare notes. And then I took the time to write up an analysis. And the answer was no. There was not a need to evacuate Tokyo based on the facts as we saw them, based on weather and what was going on in the reactors. And I said, if you see the following things, then maybe we'll change our minds. And that analysis actually went out to a lot of CEOs that the board served, and I would send daily updates. But the media was saying, "Oh my goodness, we got to evacuate all of Japan," and that certainly would have been the easy answer to just go along and say, "Be conservative, be safe, get everybody out." But I didn't want to just jump on the wagon for that sake. I wanted to look myself, and so I did my own research, and we found our own answer.
That's a tough one. That's a tough one. It's people's health, it's people's security. So that's
I
a
didn't take it lightly.
tough decision to call.
Yeah.
A couple of quick questions. These don't need thought. I'm just going to read out a question. Whatever pops into your mind, share it with us. Favorite cuisine, Italian, French, or something else?
I like everything, almost literally, but I do prefer a little bit my French side to my Italian side.
Okay. Tennis or soccer?
Soccer.
What is the most listened to artist on your phone or iPod or whatever you use?
It's, if you would not believe the range, it goes from Pavarotti to heavy metal with some jazz and Earth, Wind, and Fire and things like that in there. I do
What was
like
the
Ben
most listened
Folds.
in the last 1 week?
Yeah, I do listen to a lot of Ben Folds and a lot of jazz. So it's an unusual combination.
Okay. All right. Well, let's get into the township stuff. Just so that everyone knows, the township committee has 5 members and there is a staggered election schedule. 2 seats are open this year. There are 4 candidates, 2 on the Democratic ticket and 2 on the Republican ticket. You are on the Republican ticket. What attracted you to be on the Republican ticket? Why did you decide to be on this side?
Right. I've been a lifelong Republican since my youth. I've always been attracted to the party that stood for economic growth and creating opportunity, like the opportunity my father was able to build upon coming out of Brooklyn. And I've always believed that growing the pie helps more than redistributing the pie. If you look around the world, if we step back globally, the billions of people in Africa, Southeast Asia, China that have seen their standards of living rise over the last 3, 4 decades, that's not because there was some transfer scheme. It's because capitalism created growth and the tide raised the boats. So I've
So you
always
are a
been
lifelong conservative, believe in the Republican values.
on the
Sorry to
fiscal
cut you
side.
off.
Yeah,
Mhm.
on the fiscal side. On the social side, Tom Kean Sr. was the governor when I was coming of age. He was very much a moderate Republican, wasn't strongly on the social issues. And I've always been kind of there, socially moderate. I have friends of all different backgrounds, and I don't judge or prejudice against anybody. So I'm very comfortable with the Republican economic platform. I would say I'm much more of a New Jersey moderate Republican.
Okay. In this cycle, more than ever, I think the Republican platform and the Democratic platforms have separated. Doesn't seem like there are any moderates or any side anymore. And President Trump has redefined, some would say, the Republican platform in very stark terms. Are there things that you strongly agree with or disagree with in the way Trump has defined the Republican platform?
Yeah, certainly. I realize there's kitchen table reasons why people came to his flag, but honestly, I was never there. I've never been comfortable. Growing up here in New Jersey, I watched the USFL and the New Jersey Generals and how that ended quite badly. I watched the casinos down in Atlantic City and how that ended quite badly. So, from a business conduct, from a personal conduct, from a conduct in office, I'm not on the comfort level with President Trump that others are. But I still believe in those core principles of limited government, of economic growth that underpin the Republican Party. And so I know it's hard to believe, but there are still moderates out there to be found. Um, I liked John Kasich 4 years ago. My father went to school with Colin Powell, and actually, it was a year apart from him at CCNY. And John McCain's always been a fan, somebody I've been a fan of as a fellow Navy officer. So, those are some that I still think have some appeal to the center. And that's what I'm still trying to, I'm not trying to win the national election. I'm trying to serve our fellow residents of Milburn. And so I'm not going to bring national politics in. It's about being creative and constructive here.
Nick, you would understand that lot of people do associate. For example, you have endorsed Tom Kean, and there has been a lot of controversy recently on an ad that NRCC has ran against his opponent, um, Tom Malinowski, which Tom Kean hasn't
Disavowed.
disavowed or said anything about. So by association, people would think that being on the Republican ticket, being somebody who has endorsed this, it means that you support these activities. How do you think the political discourse is working in the country and specifically in our neighborhood and in our um, Congress race? And what would you say is the boundary that somebody should follow when they are going after their opponents? And of course, I've been reading the articles that have been written even in the township, much more civil than what we saw in some other debates recently. But still,
Right.
it is, politics does get a little nasty where people start taking some liberties. What is your view? What's the boundary? And at what point would you think this is crossing the line?
Yeah. So let's rewind a little bit. So Tom Kean Jr. is certainly not a radical. The police union has endorsed him. The firefighter union has endorsed him. The Chamber of Commerce has endorsed him. These are not radical organizations. The Kean family has served New Jersey not for years or decades, but literally centuries. So I am comfortable, given the two options that I have, endorsing Tom Kean Jr. Now, it doesn't mean I believe everything that he believes. Look, Bernie Sanders endorsed Joe Biden. Doesn't mean that Bernie Sanders abandoned his ideas on higher education reform or healthcare reform. It says that between the two options, Bernie had a preference for Joe Biden. And so it is with me, between the two options of Tom Malinowski and Tom Kean, I have a preference for a moderate Republican. Now, I have many friends, Democrat friends in town, who tell me that they're going to vote for Tom Malinowski and Menon Volpicelli. And I can respect that. If they've done their research and that's what represents what they want in Congress, I can respect that decision. And just as many Democrats look at the left hand of the ticket and say, hey, Republicans, you ought to be looking hard when it's the presidential choice, right? Is this a year to not vote the party line? I then say, okay, we should be thinking about that. When you get to the right hand of the ballot, is this a time for Democrats to maybe not look strictly party line and to return the favor and at least get to know Dr. Menon and myself? Doesn't mean you have to vote for us, but give us a chance. I think we've tried to be constructive and creative and research to present some fresh ideas. But yeah, it's gotten much more nasty. I mean, the last 20 years have increasingly gotten nasty, and it's getting to the point where we really need to pull back. And it's unfortunate because just a couple of weeks ago was the anniversary of 9/11. And in the aftermath of 9/11, we were united as an America, all across the whole spectrum. And we've really spiraled back apart. And, America's enemies must cackle with glee as we pull each other apart and find ways to divide. We've got to find ways to work together. I still believe in the potential of this country. I still believe this is a
So Nick, I'm going to pull you
place.
back to the specifics of the question because I know this is a sensitive issue. This kind of specific ad that has resulted in a New York Times article, several comments, do you think it crossed the line?
I don't know if I've seen the ad, so I can't comment it. I try not to seek out the crazy stuff, so
Okay.
I can't.
I think I have looked at the issue from both sides. It is the facts are Tom Malinowski did for 12 years run Human Rights HRW. That was a lobbying organization that specifically did oppose a particular thing, which Tom Malinowski has clarified that he believed there were some good reasons to not support the legislation. But the facts are there. Now, how that has been put in the ad and how it has been twisted by NRCC is a different matter, but it would be something that I think people would want to know. So I know you have not seen it and you're not ready, but I think there is some sensitivity around it, which would be, you'll have many other opportunities to address. It'll be good for you to tell us. I'm going to change topics now and come to some of the local issues. The ones that I've picked for discussion, the first one is the affordable housing one. I'm going to give a quick summary so that we don't spend a lot of time going through the background. There is a fair housing rule coming out of the court process, which has been going on for decades, which says that every township needs to have certain affordable housing for low income housing in each town. And according to their levels of requirement, and currently we have somewhere around 109 to 140 units as our requirement, and which can grow potentially, it's not certain, but up to 800 to 1600 units by 2025. If we don't have a plan, any developer who has a piece of property can go ask for rezoning if they do 20% of the units as these affordable housing. So it can create a situation potentially where people can have zoning laws and situations completely working outside what the township would want. We have put a plan in there which calls for some rezoning of 4 areas and some set aside of development, but that only gets to about 300 units, which is way short of what the potential need is, but probably sufficient for what the current need is. Now, this is where we are. It's clear that it is potentially a big issue. I've heard that the view is that Republicans tend to push the ball forward and say we have enough to deal with right now, we don't need to focus on it. So my first question is, do you think this specific thing is a big issue on which something more than what the township is doing today needs to be done in the next 2 years?
Absolutely. So, first of all, administrations in town of both parties have wrestled with this issue. And I don't want to cast aspersions on the people who've come before me on why we are where we are. But other towns have continued to not make good faith efforts, Englewood Cliffs being a very strong example. And eventually the courts get fed up and they leave you to the mercies of the developers. I don't think that would serve us well. So I think we need to do more. Our 2018 plan that the Township Committee submitted said that our realistic development potential was 17 units. That's it, 17 units. By the way, they're all at the mall. They're done. We're done. I don't think that's good enough. I get it that that was an opening negotiating position, just as the housing authority's opening position is the 1,600 or whatever large number they throw out there, which is more than doubling the number of apartments we have in town. So that's not realistic. It has to be somewhere in the middle. I've negotiated contracts worth hundreds of millions of dollars. I know how to do big negotiations. We need to negotiate a reasonable number, given the fact that we are a mature, built out town that cannot handle a ton of new construction. And so trying to find a way to both make a good faith effort without a ton of construction is what led us to research and find the program that Edison, New Jersey did. By the way, it was a Democratic mayor. So I'm not above pulling good ideas, regardless of what letter is next to the idea. So, and what they did is they lightly taxed all the apartments in town. They collected that money and then incentivized the landlords who would make a certain percent of their apartments affordable. So without laying a single brick, they created affordable housing. And because, as you mentioned, when you do new construction, affordable housing, new construction, one affordable lets you get 4 market rate. If you're building 10 affordable, it's a 50 unit building. So if we can pull 50 units out of our existing housing to be affordable, that's 250 that don't have to get built. And so I think we need to look at this market to affordable conversion program and really ask if we can make this work here, so that we're not playing hardball and not making progress. At the same time, we're working within the limits of our town.
Understood. So the proposal here is, like Edison, you'd like to convert some of the existing development and apartments into the affordable housing by giving some incentives. And you said very specifically by potentially redirecting some tax from the market or regular units into the incentive for people who are willing to convert them without doing a lot of additional development.
Yeah.
And
That's
then
how
people would have to
Edison did it.
believe, and the people would have to believe that this would be a negotiated settlement where we settle somewhere between 100, 200 to more than 1,000 units, and the right leadership for it is somebody who could direct that negotiation well. Have I summarized
That's
what your
right.
view is?
That's right.
Okay.
And then I think Dr. Menon also mentioned our idea of the rateable accessories. So finding basement apartments, garage apartments, carriage houses And if they're willing to make them affordable, we ask for a variance on behalf of the owner. And again, you're not going to get a ton of units that way, but every unit counts at a 4-to-1 ratio. And then there are 2 homes for special needs adults. They're not in our count today. They really should be. So we should find a way to get those into our account. And even better, if we're able to get the people who run those homes some help to reward them for the good work they're doing. So you put all that together, and I think it's at least a piece of the pie. I'm not so naive as to say we're not going to have construction. I think we are. But if we are in control, then the size, the density, the height can be much more consistent with our town. The Chatham Road development, which a lot of folks are not in love with, it's tall, it's dense, it's not consistent with the rest of that neighborhood. So I think if we lean forward and are proactive, then we can keep it more consistent and what we want.
Okay, thank you. Moving to the second topic, I think there is a lot of words, maybe more, that have been said about special incentive district, the SID program. And just to summarize for people, it is a township initiative to spend $206,000 a year to build a organization or a small team which would promote business in downtown and some other areas in the township. Several towns around us have some similar kind of an incentive, and they do things like beautification, signage, other things. And at least in Milburn, the idea is most of the money will go in hiring a full-time executive director. It will be paid for by the township for 2 years, and then there'll be a $625 average charge on the business in town. That's what has been passed and proposed, and you don't like it much. And now I understand that there are conflicts of interest on vote. That has been said, that and there is no representation of business. These are 2 things that I think you have mentioned already. My question is slightly different. So these issues are clear that there is potentially some conflict of interest and there needs to be representation of business. But what I don't understand is, why is $206,000 the most important issue in a $60 million budget? And if you were to guide the process, what is the most wasteful or least impactful $206,000 you can find?
Yeah, so the problem is the money is incremental, new money, particularly on small businesses in the expanded SID zone. So we had a special improvement district for decades in town. It was focused on the downtown. And in the new ordinance, it was expanded to include Upper Milburn Avenue, Morris Avenue, the area by the Short Hills train station. So for those businesses, this is a new tax. And when you do a special improvement district, you're supposed to conduct a feasibility study. You hire a firm to go out, knock on every business's door and say, hey, this is coming. Are you good with that? Our township committee completely skipped that step. A lot of businesses in the expanded zone didn't know this was coming. That's one of our core objections to it. The second objection is that our old special improvement district, the board was the business people got to pick their own representatives. It's the same way in Livingston. In Summit, there's a direct election for who's on the board. This board is going to be handpicked by the township committee. And I don't think the township committee can talk for the business community. We're elected by the residents, not the business owners. So I think the business owners, again, should have been consulted. And when 30 of them had concerns about this special improvement district, I think that warranted a slowdown and look. And then finally,
there has been some legal challenge that has been put onto it.
Well, that's right. Because you didn't follow the process, it's getting sued. And there's also a question of whether the town is even allowed to fund the first year and a half. I know it sounds very generous, but the town is going to fund the first year and a half of the SID. That may not be legal. We need to ask that question first, not after. And so $260,000 is not a lot for the town, but it is $600 for these businesses, and it's incremental. And finally, you step back, is the SID going to solve the core problem that the township committee said we're trying to address? We have vacancies in town. What's driving those vacancies? And can the SID really solve it? Well, the SID's not going to be able to address lack of parking or zoning that isn't, right or easy, or too many approvals in the process, or not as walkable downtown as we would want, right? Or high taxes, or there's a number of things that may be driving the vacancies, or maybe the buildings aren't in great shape. I haven't been in some of them. There's a lot of reasons that may be driving it. So we should look at the full picture. And I think a SID could be part of the answer if it was done right, if there was a feasibility study, if the business community wanted it. But the way it was done just doesn't feel right to me.
Nick, are you sure this is not becoming a personal issue between certain people and factions within town, and too much attention is being given on something which maybe there are bigger issues to handle, given 206,000 is 206,000 versus 60 million?
I don't know. I think it's a small town, and there's certainly, the DMDA had the previous SID, its throws. And so I'm not familiar with all the history. I just do think that you have to do feasibility studies. You have to do government right. You can't rush through things. And I'll give another example of something that was rushed. There was going to be a proposal to change the zoning on Upper Milburn Avenue. It would have reduced the setback between the restaurants and the residences. And they realized, the current township committee realized very quickly this was not well thought out. And they tabled it the very same meeting that they proposed it. Well, it should never been proposed, right? Things like that should take their time to percolate through the zoning board, percolate through the planning board. Let's do it once right. But to go back to your previous question, which I skipped, just like I did with my condo board, just like I did at Rackets Club, I'll look at the town budget and look to see if there's places where money could be better spent. I've done it on small budgets like those in the $1 million. I do it in my work on budgets in the hundreds of millions of dollars. I did it on the Columbia Ballistic Missile Submarine Program for the United States Navy, where we looked at how can we save money. We saved the Navy over $100 million per submarine times 10 submarines. That's $1 billion that we saved the Navy by being planful and deliberate and following the same recipe that I've done at Rackets and my condo board, and that I can bring that to the township committee.
Okay. Last topic, sensitive one. We are in an extremely divided area where friends have stopped talking to friends because they support one or the other party. As a leader of township, if you have to address issues of sensitivity, which go over freedom of expression, is putting out a Blue Lives Matter an issue of freedom of expression, or is it an issue of insensitivity and hatred? Same thing with the Black Lives Matter or any of these issues. I'm not comparing the two. I'm simply saying that these issues in a different time, in different zone, may have been handled much easily, but they are very tricky right now. Right. And school principals and township people are getting into trouble because they make one or the other decision.
Right.
If you were to articulate guidelines for our township and say, how do we coexist where we can express and have our views, but we can also make it a safe environment for people, what would those be? What would you say should be our behavior?
Yeah, so the
what's
first
agreeable,
thing,
what's not agreeable?
Yeah. So, and you're right, it's very sensitive and it's unfortunate. So the first thing I've done is, people that I know in town who I know are Democrats, I've gone to them. I say, vote for me, great. Don't vote for me, that's fine, right? I'm still going to be friendly to you. I'm still going to respect you, right? So I'm not going to make this super uber personal. But I hope you at least give us a listen. In terms of the thin blue line flag, and let's be very careful. It's not the Blue Lives Matter flag. It's not that blue lives are more important. It was a flag that said that after some police officers were gunned down, that we need to respect the value of police officer lives. And so, I think that flag has gotten some connotations with it that did not go with the intent of the creator. And by the same token, there have been some connotations that have way overstepped what the intent of the Black Lives Matter organizers have come with. But I would think any flag or any symbol we put up would want to be unifying, right? So you look at the rainbow flag, and there's room for everybody on the rainbow, right? And so it's not immediately divisive. And so I'd look for symbols that are not divisive. I do think Black Lives Matter, the statement, should be universal. Black Lives Matter, the organization, isn't, right? The adult children of Muhammad Ali have both said that their dad wouldn't have supported that. And he's a civil rights icon. Black military veterans I talk to, African Americans in police I talk to, aren't comfortable with Black Lives Matter, the organization. So maybe that's not the right flag, but certainly the statement deserves support. And so, can we find a flag or a symbol that says racial equity or social justice or something else? But that requires an actual discussion, a planned discussion, not on the agenda, last minute, surprise attack in township committee. So, I would listen to the Democratic
So
colleagues
you said
on the
something
township
quite
committee.
interesting, if I can peel it a little bit more.
Yeah,
You distinguish between Black Lives Matter organization and Black Lives Matter concept. Say some more. What does it mean for you? What's the difference, and why is one okay and not the other?
yeah. So, growing up in New Jersey in a little suburban town, I wasn't the most exposed cosmopolitanly, although my parents did take me to travel. But when I got to the Navy, I served with people from coast to coast, from the cornfields to the inner city, right? And we were all unified by a common mission and a oath to protect and serve the Constitution. So I got to really know and appreciate people of all backgrounds in America. And so it is very clear. The young lady who spoke at the township committee pointed out a lot of ways that segregation and economic disadvantage has permeated for decades. And so I think it is important to highlight African Americans and Native Americans as mattering. And so we should be able to say that Black lives do matter. I don't think the organization, though, right? And you go back to some of the founding documents, there's some interesting things in there. You go to some of the statements that are still made. You go to some of you hear rhetoric about meeting violence with violence. I don't think that advances the cause. I think, it's funny. An everyman who wasn't seeking the spotlight, but George Floyd changed the world, right? And he wasn't looking to do it, obviously, when the incident happened. But that has brought people together. And I thought there was a moment in the following weeks when you had a broad consensus that, yes, we need to do something, we need to do something different. And I think that consensus has been eroded by the continuing violence that's escalated on both sides, left and right. And I think it's done a disservice to that original, eye-opening event. And so I think we're doing a disservice with the violence and with the heated rhetoric. I think we do much better with the peaceful demonstrations. That's why we were at the one at the high school. So I support Black Lives Mattering. I don't support the organization Black Lives Matter.
Would you say the same thing, that the concept of Blue Lives Matter is fine, but some of the organizations, like we heard and I have no idea whether these organizations have anything to do here or not, but we heard some names, even in the presidential debate, that some organizations may not be good. Would you say the same thing on the Blue Lives Matter?
Yeah, absolutely. So thin blue line flag saying that we need to support our police, yet hold them accountable, is 100% in bounds. But people would then take that to the extreme and, no accountability or blindly attacking the other side. And some of these organizations aren't even veiled in their white supremacy. And there should be no time for bigotry, anti-Semitism, white supremacy, given the history of this country. So when you take something from the original good and you morph it, you lose the original intent, and it quickly can get out of control.
This has been fascinating conversation, Nick. It's already 45 minutes, a little longer than what I anticipated. Thank you so much. I'll give you a final question. As briefly as you can, why should the 75% people who voted line A in the last election consider voting for you?
Yeah, so even in the last election, the vote at Township Committee was very close. And I think people in Millburn Short Hills are very smart and will look at the qualifications and the statements that candidates have made. We've tried to put forward concrete solutions, creative solutions, non-ideological solutions. We've tried to engage in civic discourse, right? And I, again, appreciate this forum because the West Hobart Association and the South Mountain Association tried to do a debate, and it was delayed until mid to end of October. The Short Hills Association proposed a debate. It was delayed by at least a week. Happy Millburn proposed a candidate forum. It was delayed by multiple weeks to the end of October. The Asian American Association proposed a debate. It was declined by the other side. So being able to get out my message and being able to have people get to know us, I am indebted to this, nonpartisan platform. And I hope the other two candidates come and visit with you as well, because we deserve to hear from them. And so I appreciate the platform. I appreciate people giving a chance to know Dr. Menn and myself. And we'll try to serve you honorably, whether you're a Democrat or Republican, doesn't matter. You can still call us up.
Thank you so much. And of course, I have invited the other two candidates, as I've mentioned, both in my posts and earlier. And I look forward to having the township being as informed as possible, and including myself, and voting for the best candidates that will take this town forward. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.